I believe that all of us are testers in our daily lives because bugs can be found everywhere around us. On the other hand, it doesn't mean that everyone is fit to work in a QA department. This job requires you to repeat the same actions an infinite number of times.
We do an important job, but unfortunately it's one that's unseen by our players. The majority of players can't even imagine how many bugs they don't encounter in the game, thanks to our QA team.
A tester is a person who follows test cases to carry out various tests. A QA specialist is a person who analyzes a problem and creates test cases.
If a plumber does their job, fine, nobody will notice it. But if a plumber did their job poorly, everyone would notice it immediately.
There is a popular belief that a programmer spends 10% of their work time writing the code of a program and the remaining 90% searching for errors in that code and fixing them. In World of Warships, the latter is the task of the Quality Assurance Team, or just QA. In today's episode, our QA team is going to tell you what they do to make your favorite game work without bugs and freezes, or simply put, how they fix bugs.
Speaking in simple terms and definitions, a bug is any deviation of an actual result from an expected one. Bugs can take various forms and appear in a design, idea or code.
The term bug was coined in the middle of the last century. The credit for coining the term was given to Grace Hopper. At that time, she worked at Harvard University. While she was looking for a solution to a problem, she found a moth stuck between contacts. And it was this bug that had caused the problem. People have called faults bugs since then.
There have been some cases where something went in a different way than players expected. But actually, this was how we had designed it. It was how it should have worked. In such cases, we're straightforward with our players. Sorry players, but it's not a bug. That's the way it's intended to work. We explain why and how it should actually work. There are cases where players let us know that some design features need to be changed. And there have been cases where we reinterpreted the game design and made it clearer and more user-friendly. I can't say that there are some specific QA rules. In our game, we probably test issues in the same way as almost any QA team on any other development project does. We work with documentation that contains the essence of any assigned task. We communicate with our development team to get a clear understanding about how this or that idea has been implemented. When we get an expected behavior and actual result, we carry out our tests. Positive tests imply that we verify that something works as intended. Negative tests mean that we do something that isn't intended to be done. And this action shouldn't lead to anything bad or inverse. For example, if we input a space into the password field, we shouldn't log into the game because this password is incorrect. This is a negative test case. We need to get a logical and reasonable error, or some kind of a message that the current case, the current system behavior, doesn't suit our course. Initially, we had just two types of bugs: content and development ones. The number of bug types has grown over time. The emerging bug types lead to the emergence of new QA teams. New QA teams emerged, such as the content team, which is responsible for ships and sounds. The game logic team works on the entire game logic, our gameplay per se. Then the so-called Terra team was formed. These guys work on game modes. We also have the rendering QA team, which deals with all rendered things in the game. We needed all of that to ensure our game looks nice in terms of graphics. There is also the server core team, which directly tests server functions of the game. The back-end, in other words. The back-end literally means processes happening in the background. The client core team is hardly the last QA team in terms of their importance, but few people know about it. This QA team works on testing our game core. The core is the basis where our game stands from the technological perspective. The first thing the team works on is launching the game client, to ensure that the client runs the same way on Windows 11 and Windows 8, for example, and so that it runs on all localizations of the Windows systems.
We should probably also mention a type of formal bug that doesn't depend on our actions. Issues may occur in some data centers that offer provider services in specific regions. In this case, we receive a lot of requests. When we begin inspecting the requests, it becomes apparent that players can't log into the game in some specific area. We start delving deeper into the issue until we find out that the issue is related to provider services, or that something else has happened down the line. Unfortunately, we can't do anything about that.
My team is directly involved with release testing. The work scope of our team isn't something that one can read about in textbooks or elsewhere. Our team was originally formed for quality assurance of pre-release and release versions of the game that would eventually make their way to production servers, including external and pre-production servers, such as the Supertest and public test servers. Our main goal is to test an almost final product that will be delivered to players. We can only fix defects, but can't perform any further development with versions of the codebase we work with. Basically, it's a whole product. It's a build that has some new functions, as well as some rectified issues and amended old functions. The goal of our release team is to conduct the so-called smoke test, and thus validate that product functions haven't faltered after the integration testing. When all the product functions were integrated, it was possible for them to break, because conflicts during code merging are possible. When we test that the integrated products work correctly, we start performing external testing. This is the Supertest and public test.
We are on the edge. We deal with client-server interactions and some services, web services that work in the game using an embedded web browser. That's why we have to be jacks of all trades in our work, to know something about this and that. When our team tests features, it depends on the specific thing that you are testing. Usually, you need to look at server logs, web application logs, and even client logs if necessary. On the whole, QA specialists inspect how a build works and how they like it from the player's perspective. Whether the build is working as expected or not, a build can be great and even ideal at the stage of initial discussions and specifications. But when you assemble all the parts into a whole thing and start verifying it, you may see that even though it works as intended, it works poorly and incorrectly at the same time. Then it's time for another meeting to discuss the arisen issues and possible solutions to make the build in a way that everyone is happy with it, both players and developers. Bugs appear due to various reasons. An error can be made in an initial design. That's why it's better to start testing at the stage of discussing an idea, because at that stage, an experienced tester can cut out some unviable ideas based on their professional experience. Following the discussion, we compose either a design document or specification describing how we want to implement our idea and how it should work. It's possible to detect some illogical or unviable things at that stage as well. Or at least we can note to ourselves the things that can go wrong and things that require some extra attention. Then the development starts. During the development stage, elements are tested individually at first. After that, all the elements are combined into a complete thing. We obtain a feature as the result, for example, the dockyard, and our task is to verify that the whole feature works as intended. The construction progresses, the rewards are credited, and the animations move as they should, to check that everything is good, nice and smooth.
There may be a non-trivial error that is connected with some architecture of the executive code. We can sometimes forget that Python has some private methods or global variables that behave slightly differently compared with our local tests on pretty low-end rigs. They behave differently in our production environment, which basically represents a server comprising a large number of small clusters, smaller servers. In a big world where all these servers are united, the code can create unexpected results and unpredicted behaviors. In this case, such defects can be hard and almost impossible to detect.
As an example, I can recall a bug from the production stage involving aircraft carrier August von Parseval. The thing was that the effects were removed from the original carrier model. However, we didn't consider the fact that the same model was also used for Parseval's Iron Cross skin. As a result, that led to faulty scripts for players in battle if at least a single player was using that skin.
We've done some extra work on ranked battles. On the whole, everything worked fine. Everything had worked fine with us as well, up until the work merged into a single development branch. That's when it turned out that changes to ranked battles had broken clan battles. The interaction between them wasn't quite obvious. Thankfully, we figured out the issue fast. Naturally, that error didn't reach either a super test or public test. I can't remember any case where we didn't receive a ton of reports that something was wrong with this or that after we had passed the feature to a super test. You fix some things while other things are intended to work in a particular way, and you realize that players just misunderstood your ideas. It goes without saying that there have been cases where some changes were reasonable. Some things were polished after a super test, even though the project hadn't accounted for that initially.
For example, that was the case with Shikishima. Shikishima carries main guns with a unique 510mm caliber. However, the range at which the sound of firing the main guns was heard had been tuned incorrectly. That issue was spotted and rectified, but players liked that powerful reverberating sound so much that they made a petition on Reddit to return it to the game.
Sure, there are cases where people come to us and point out some defects, and we tell them, no, it's not a bug, because it was an intended design decision. One of the latest examples of this was related to the number of containers players have on their barge in the port. So, imagine players have 100 containers on their barge. Then they want to obtain the 101st random container. Players clicked on the Obtain button, and the obtained container was then opened automatically. That was an intended design decision. There is no point in showing a container just to open it immediately after that. It's unreasonable, even in terms of resources spent. We listened to the opinions of our players and decided to rework that design a bit. First of all, we turned off the animation. In update 0.10.10, the animation of obtaining the 101st container will be removed. Players will no longer see how they obtain containers that they don't need. They will just receive a message that the container has been opened automatically. In future updates, we'll add a special notification to let players know that they have more than 100 containers. It will warn players that if they select a container at that time, it will be opened automatically.
The array of defects that can arise during the development process is pretty wide, and the QA team uses various methods and tools to effectively detect and rectify them. Since each and every bug is unique in its own way, in order to fix it, a tester utilizes an individual set of means, the diversity of which is dictated by the resourcefulness of the tester and only limited by their imagination.
There is a waterfall development model. It presupposes a pretty standard process for creating products or functions of some specific type. The first step is an idea, then goes for design, development, verification, and it all ends with a release. There is also a modified V model, which adds verification to every mentioned step. So the design process goes like this: idea, verification, design, verification, and development verification. The V model saves time for testing because the sooner you detect a defect, the cheaper it is to fix. Testers spend less time for additional testing, creating bug cases, and rectifying bugs, because when the code is eventually written, it needs fixing. But if we can avoid writing that code in the first place, it will require fewer resources.
I think that every team has their own unique things and tools that help them make their work more efficient and less time-consuming. Let's take, for instance, one clan feature, Naval Battle. The feature has a weekly format. We don't spend an entire week testing it. We can compress the time needed to do that to just 10 minutes. Roughly speaking, in just 10 minutes, one can check that the feature works, all actions are considered, and the rewards are credited. If we take the Dockyard, there is a feature that enables you to delete all progress by clicking a single button, so you don't have to. Well, when you have finished building a ship once and received all the rewards, what's next? You need to repeat that. You click the button, re-enter the Dockyard, and start anew.
There are development methods. The so-called development tools that help us test new features and functions much faster and in a much more quality manner. For example, we can teleport to any corner of the map, which is useful because some weather conditions start in a specific part of it. If you travel to that place on a ship, it will take a lot of time, but you can just teleport there instead. That tool significantly speeds up our working process, so the testing takes less time. Using such tools, we can greatly help ourselves. And when we help ourselves in our work, we also help our players because it helps us detect more defects. The more bugs we detect at the development and integration stage, the more bugs we are able to fix. Even if those bugs aren't critical, but we are still within our deadlines for the feature, the tools help us rectify even the smallest bugs. The testing is conducted not just by the QA team alone. We also carry out internal testing. Basically, we invite people from all of our teams to do the internal testing. The main requirement for all those closed internal tests is taking a mandatory survey after the testing is done. In the survey, volunteers describe their opinions about the functions they have tested. They express their opinion about whether a feature is fit for the game, whether it contradicts the game or reality overall, or not. Following the internal tests, the next stages are external tests. The first closed external test is the super test.
Each of our teams indicates some things they want super testers to check and pay attention to. That's done because some things have already been tested and they don't require any additional attention, while some other things should be tested by a larger group of users on a larger span of PC hardware and software, etc.
This happens on a dedicated platform, and access to this is provided to just a limited group of specially selected volunteers among players who have agreed to help us improve the game and to help us find issues within our game. They differ from regular players in that they have been partially taught how to create bug reports. They know how to compose the reports correctly, so our development team doesn't have to spend much time processing their feedback. They receive additional rewards for their work. The next stage is the public test. It's a completely open platform for anyone who is willing to take part. When that server is on, any player can join in at any time.
Prior to any public test, we organize a meeting where we decide what we need players to pay attention to. Next, an article is posted on the website that specifies something like, "Construct the dockyard by completing at least 5 combat missions, and you'll receive a container, or flags, or some camo, etc." Enough players join the server and complete these combat missions, and on our side, respectively, we're either assured that everything works correctly, or we see that some things work poorly and need some work.
Some functions can be totally removed or disabled due to various reasons. One such example is the asymmetric battles in update 0.10.9. We had to turn them off because players had detected a blocker issue during the public test. The issue prevented us from delivering the feature. After we had evaluated the necessary cost to rectify that issue, as well as the risks that could be caused by the fixes we wanted to introduce, we decided not to release the feature and revise it.
When a public test is launched, we have a mechanism called traffic lights in the studio. People from different departments come, evaluate the feature, and leave their feedback. But it all happens on our internal resources. Accordingly, some things can change based on this feedback.
It offers a good opportunity to share the work you've done with other team members, but on a prepared platform. Basically, the production environment. It's helped the developers love their products even more, to value not only their own work, but also the work of their colleagues. This also incites people to leave constructive feedback about new features. The QA department and development teams actually work in very close cooperation. We speak to each other every day. We meet in person, call, and write each other, and basically use every means of communication imaginable, in addition, of course, to creating bug reports and providing simple feedback. We've had incidents, of course, where a QA engineer reports a defect, and a developer doesn't agree with it. At the same time, there are situations where a developer wants to fix something, and a QA engineer doesn't agree. But that's the case with any communication between people. Disagreements happen. The main thing is to remain calm.
Interaction with developers is always different, but for the most part, it's positive. You have to find a compromise anyway in order to resolve issues you're facing. No matter what, we're still one team working on one project. We never say there are no bugs anymore, we found everything. No professional tester will ever say this. The result of our work should be new functionality implemented and working in the way it is supposed to work, without critical bugs, errors and shortcomings. In general, we're ready to deploy it on the live server like this.
Every person has unique individuality, and they set up their environment according to their preferences. Their own graphic settings, their own ship, their own bonus values, from camouflages and signals to commander skills. It's an enormous number of intersections that are extremely hard or sometimes even impossible to discover. That's why there are issues sometimes. One example of such a hard-to-detect problem was aircraft carrier Roosevelt. Players increased the HP of their squadron so much that it went over the limit that we had specified in the game's code. This resulted in all aviation of this carrier being basically broken. Another example is the issue that our Japanese players had. Because of different date format existing in the Japanese localization of Windows, our game client couldn't understand this date and work with it. Because of that, players were transferred straight to the port after each battle and didn't see the battle results screen. Because of a very aggressive environment in the video game industry, this arms race, the same content can bore players very quickly. If we release an update in 4 weeks that doesn't have anything new, but we've fixed, let's say, 200 bugs, this sounds perfect, ideal. We've made players happy, we've heard their feedback, and we've fixed everything. But then they'll have to wait 4 more weeks to get something new. It's a huge risk, and players will eventually burn out because they'll get tired of waiting for new content, something new. Unfortunately, we can't fix everything at once. Some issues require quite a long time to analyze. A good example is the bug with launching torpedoes when turning. Players complained about it for quite a long time, but we've fixed it only recently. First, it was a bug in the game logic. All game logic fixes need to be considered as very risky because it's much more serious than editing a sentence in the text or some permanent camouflage of some ships that only a limited number of players have. It's the game logic. Moreover, torpedoes, which all of our players use all the time. Fixing the code in this area is extremely risky. Of course, there are problems that require almost all code to be rewritten, doing the so-called refactoring. It means that we recreate the existing code on the basis of new technology. Nothing changes for players then. They can still launch torpedoes just like before. However, at the code level there was major refactoring. The code was optimized to keep torpedoes from lagging when they travel through water, or something like that. Of course, such refactoring requires a lot of resources.
Unfortunately, we can't foresee all the possible combinations of hardware and software that players all over the world can have. Accordingly, when people come to us with a problem, we ask them for a WG check report. And people answer, "I won't send you anything. I've come to you with a problem, so figure it out." It's not a constructive position, and we can't help in such cases. The game works for most players, and we can't know what went wrong for one specific user. We need the report to figure it out, and we need to come up with a solution for this specific player or for a specific group of people.
Well, the name hotfix is pretty self-explanatory. They're hot from the oven. These are fixes that need to be delivered as soon as possible, right here, right now, because players have a problem, or our game has a problem that is inconveniencing players. Of course, we assemble a team as quickly as possible to resolve such problems, and we need to find a way to deliver the solution, regardless of its origin, whether it's on the server side or client side, or maybe somewhere on the back end. It's not that important. We know that this issue is causing great discomfort, and we have to fix it as soon as possible.
Let's say you cooked a soup. You pour the soup into bowls. That's how it looks on our side. We deliver a patch and players begin to install it. Some think that the soup is not salty enough. Accordingly, a player comes to us with their problem. They explain that something doesn't work correctly. So you make the suggestion to the specific player whose soup is not salty enough that they can simply add some salt directly to their bowl. It's similar to when a person contacts player support. They give a piece of advice, it helps, everything works, and everybody is happy. Everything works for other players as well. Now let's assume that everybody feels there is a lack of salt in their soup. The problem becomes more global, and it's easier to add salt to all individual bowls and also add more salt to the pot, so that the change is the same for everyone and unified. In game terms, it's more similar to a micro-patch, for which we might need to stop the live server. But let's assume there was a much more serious problem with our soup. Our release, don't forget, it's too salty. The issue affects everybody. I mean, everybody involved in the game. What do we do? Global changes to the patch, removing some functionality. We can add some sour cream, which will also have an effect on the consistency of our soup release. It doesn't mean that everybody will be happy about a change like this. Unfortunately, not all of our solutions are ideal. They can leave some people unhappy, but that's always a compromise. The main task is to make everything work in the way we planned for the majority of players.
Some people think that we only fix the bugs that people discuss most of all. I won't deny that some bugs actually get fixed when there is a certain number of complaints about them. However, first of all, we fix bugs based on their severity and priority.
All these bugs are different from the point of view of their reproducibility. The most difficult ones are those bugs that can only be reproduced in certain situations, at some specific lunar phase, day and time. So you're sitting and trying different variants. To fix something, you first need to reproduce it accurately so you can understand where to apply the fix.
At the same time, we understand that we work in quite an aggressive video game industry. A very big emphasis must be made on developing something new, and delivering this new content to players, new features and gameplay. QA is about analysis, first of all. You start analyzing a problem. You basically plunge into it, take a dive. You start building dependencies and understand the connections. You're actually putting it all on paper, writing test cases. And it's such bliss when you realize that you've started with only a task containing a documentation link, and you end up with a huge list of test cases that you've spent a week designing, and you need another week to test them all. Then, your feature goes into production, and you think, damn, this is cool. First of all, because you've spent all this time basically developing your skills. You've had a lot of communication with the development team, so your knowledge about the development process has also grown. Talking to designers helps you acquire a designer's mindset. QA is good because you communicate a lot with other departments, almost any department, and you can learn something new for yourself from all of them. It means that you develop both horizontally horizontally and vertically, with large leaps. If you aspire to this, you have all the possibilities to do it here.
What I like about my work is that it is creative work after all. Apart from the fact that you always have documentation and specifications that describe how it should all work, you must find a way to break the feature. Scenarios that go beyond what is documented. Judging by your experience, the experience of your colleagues and the things you heard, to make a feature as high quality as possible and release it without problems.
In general, testing requires curiosity, professional pessimism, and a critical attitude. And experience, of course, to avoid making mistakes in future. This work is difficult and stressful, but you enjoy it immensely when you realize that you've done everything to stabilize a feature.
Then comes the moment when a feature created by a game designer and tested by a strict but caring QA specialist goes live. Its fate will now be determined by you, captains. Your attention to updates and feedback on any element of the game help us make World of Warships even more interesting and define the direction of its development. Now, enjoy a video sequence of interesting bugs that have already been fixed or are in the process of being fixed at the moment.